So in this brief video, we're going to be talking about engagement. Specifically, we're going to review engagement from a holistic as well as an individualistic perspective. We're going to recognize the difference between involvement and engagement, and then we're also going to review the relationship between learning, engagement, and student success. So speaking of student success, if we go back to Aston's model and we think of the IEO model, this is essentially a positive outcome of some sort. All right, it can be graduation, it can be passing a class, it can be receiving high marks, it could be a development of the self in a positive way. Whatever way we really want to look at that, but if we will look at it a holistic way, it's essentially some sort of positive outcome for the student, particularly related to engagement. All right, and how can an institution do this? Well, there's many conditions that need to exist for an institution to truly be focused on student success. And the first one is there's a clear and focused institutional mission. Bob Jones University is a really good example of this because they have a very clear and focused institutional mission for what they're trying to do, and that is graduate and educate students based in Christ to go out and serve as missionaries in their respective field. They will not deviate from their mission, and everything they do is focused on that mission. So in terms of producing students that are based in Christ, they are very successful with that. Another area is that an institution will provide high standards for student performance, but they're also providing support. They're not just letting students coast through. They are challenging them and ensuring that students are succeeding but meeting high standards. The other piece is diversity. Specifically, an institution provides support for students to explore human differences as well as those differences as they relate to the individual. So how am I different from others? There's going to be an appreciation of that as well as respect for diverse talents, understanding that many people can do many things and that is okay. The other piece is that there is an emphasis on the first year of college. We know that the first year of college is crucial for student success. If they don't feel connected via the academic or the social systems, they're not going to continue on. The next piece is that there's an integration of prior learning and experience. So we're taking the inputs and we're bringing them into the environment to create a positive outcome. Again, going back to the IEO model. There's an ongoing application of learned skills. So once a student learns something, it's not forgotten. It is carried through. So as you notice, throughout these three lectures, I keep going back to Tinto's model and the IEO model because that's our theoretical framework. I am emphasizing this ongoing application of learned skills. The next piece is a learning-centered pedagogy. So the focus is on learning and helping the student understand the material. And this is also true from an active learning perspective. So students are very much involved with the learning experience. The next piece is the integrative culminating experience. So whatever the final experience is, it brings everything together, including the active learning, including the learning-centered pedagogy, and the like. Next is assessment and feedback. Students need to be able to provide their feedback because there's a buy-in. There's a collaboration between student, academic affairs, and student affairs. And then finally, there's quality contact with faculty out of class. That's the key point. And that's why a lot of smaller liberal arts institutions tend to have higher faculty contact because that is their specific purpose, and that's what they're trying to do. So where does this lead us for engagement? Well, first of all, if we go back to Aston, student involvement refers to the amount of physical and psychological energy that the student devotes to the academic experience. All right? So as we've talked about, it's about the student wanting to be involved both physically and putting forth the psychological energy. Now let's take this a step further and looking at it from two perspectives. The first piece is the student, and that involves their participation, both in the academic and social systems. that needs to happen for a student to become engaged. If they're not participating in these two systems, there's not going to be a level of engagement. But on the flip side, is an institution providing resources? Does it have the curriculum, and does it have the support services to get the student engaged? That's a very important piece. Engagement isn't a one-way street. It is a two-way street between the student and the institution. And this results in some specific outcomes. A student can come out better understanding their own identity, have an understanding of cognitive development. They've gained social and cultural capital. They've acquired new skills. All of the outcomes depend on the inputs and on the environment, the relationships, a whole bunch of different external factors. So again, we're seeing Tinto and we're seeing Aston all over this idea of an engagement. So let's take it one step further. And looking at Pasquarelli and Terenzini, they talk about the impact of college and that it's largely determined by the individual effort and involvement in the academic, interpersonal, and extracurricular offers on campus. Okay, that's a very Astinian idea. Yes, I just made that word up. Now, but they take it a step further. Students aren't the passive recipients of institutional efforts to educate or change them, but rather they bear the major responsibility for any gains that derive from their post-secondary experience. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that means that the student is primarily responsible because if they're not going to be engaged psychologically and physically and putting forth the energy and the effort, they're not going to get anything out of it. So you get out what you put in. It's the exact same concept with this class. Some of you are going to get a lot out of this class because you're going to put a lot in. Others aren't going to get much because you might not put as much effort into it. So let's look at this from two different ways. First, holistically. When we think about engagement, we review the previous definition. We can do a lot of different things to provide a lot of different services to a lot of different people. And some examples include the Excel Center, CSI, Residence Life. We're providing services for everybody. There's no targeted programming. There's no specific purposes. There's specific outcomes sought, but there's no intentional programming. They're not programming to a specific group of people. The other piece of that is the individualistic engagement. And this is where we can get into being very intentional with what we're doing, like doing programming for LGBTQ to increase diversity dialogues or to help educate people or to provide a space for the LGBTQ population. Same thing for diversity programming for minorities to help have those dialogues. Doing at-risk student programming, whether that's a summer bridge program, whatever it is, to individually target a specific population to help them become engaged. But remember, most of the burden lies with the student. The institution can provide the resources, provide the support, but if the student isn't going to become engaged, then nothing's going to happen. So I keep using involvement and engaged, and they are not the same thing. One can be involved in a club and organization, but another can be engaged. You cannot be engaged without being involved, but you can be involved without being engaged. So if you think about a student organization and you have somebody that comes to all of the meetings, but they're not participating, they're not speaking up, they're not contributing, they're not engaged, but they are involved. And Aston and Tinto would both say that that student isn't going to get much out of that organization because they're not putting much in. There's not that psychological or physical energy there. So what does this mean for us as student practitioners? Well, the first piece is that we need to think about active engagement. We need to be intentional with our student populations and do purposeful programming, and we need to do some self-reflecting to think, what's going to happen when I do this program? Can anything go wrong? What am I going to do if X happens? And just really thinking about what needs are we serving. Okay, and we can do this by doing a needs assessment, not just creating the same type of programs and services over and over and over again. Looking at what gaps do we have that can create a dialogue that provides support and resources to students. But again, the learning primarily falls to the student. Student affairs and academic affairs can do a lot of different things, but learning is a personal matter. So what's the trick? Well, essentially it gets us into an engagement plus learning equals success. And it's important to remember that what a student does during college is more important than who they are or where they come from. That is the quintessential point. It's about engaging and the learning that comes out of it, and that is what equals student success. So engagement is very important to what we do, particularly when we're thinking about Aston's model and Tinto's model and the American college student. And I can't reiterate enough that when we're talking with specific students, we want to ask them about their experience, not what it means for everybody regarding a specific population that they may identify with, because we're all individual. We all have different characteristics, cognitive abilities, anything that you can think of that's going to affect our learning.